Hello folks, it's Jeff Cronine here. Usually I'm talking about business things, and in some ways this subject is connected with business, but I thought I'd come outside today. I want to do a short video for you around something really important which is rarely discussed, and that's spirituality. Or we could say an authentic spirituality. And what I'm talking about has got nothing to do with religions necessarily, although religions do exploit some of the things I'll talk about. It's a secular, we could say, secular spirituality. And I'm not going to talk about God or anything dogmatic, but there's a huge amount of information that's available. Let's talk from a scientific point of view, for example. My first career was as a nuclear physicist, so I know a bit about science. And traditionally, the scientific approach, very good approach, is based on observation and hypothesis. So you hypothesize something, you design an experiment, you measure, and you decide whether it's true or not based on the results of that experiment, very simply put. The one catch about science, Western science, is that it's based on oneself, the experimenter, observing the experiment. So anecdotal information about experiences that happen to oneself is not really admissible in conventional science. Now, why is this important? Well, because in the East, there's a long history of anecdotal science, if you like. Teachers learn something, they teach a student, and then the student becomes a master and teaches more students and so on. So you have these lineages of teachings. And there's a huge amount of knowledge, wisdom, that's been accumulated in the East that is simply not available in the West. Now, in the middle of all that, of course, there's a huge amount of charlatanism and all kinds of weird people doing strange things and misleading others and all the rest of it. You know the dangers. But there are some important principles that are, if you like, almost taken for granted in the East that are not even known in the West. And I want to talk about some of those. And most of this scientific study that I've got inverted commas around is related to mind, a study of mind. As many of you know, in Western science, consciousness is a hell of a, inconvenient problem. Science has trouble explaining it. But in the East, that's not so. There's been a huge amount of study of mind and consciousness. And it's so well known and so well documented in the East, it's kind of a farce that it's not available here. But anyway, I want to talk about some of that, and I've been studying this and working with great teachers for some 40 or 50 years. So I know whereof I speak. One of the most extraordinary facts to come out of this study in the East is something that's got zillions of labels. But my teachers, one of them in particular, came up with this phrase, basic goodness, to describe it. And I'm going to try and describe it quickly to you now because I think it could be extremely useful to you in your life, in business, in everything you do. And I'll try and explain that as briefly and as succinctly as I can. Basic goodness. The nature of every human being's mind or heart-mind, the essence is this thing we call basic goodness. Now, what on earth is that, basic goodness? Well, it's difficult to talk about because it's verging on being beyond language. But here are some words to describe it that you'll like, I think. Wisdom, compassion, kindness, insight, awareness. They're all inherent in every single being. This is an amazing fact, if you like. And it's not understood. So let me try and elaborate for you. You know how we're always trying to get something from somewhere else, that we feel inadequate. we feel like we're not confident enough, or not wise enough, or not knowledgeable enough, whatever. We're always trying to get something from the outside. Now, knowledge, of course, is accumulated. Skills can be accumulated from the outside by working and experiencing things. But wisdom and insight is not. Wisdom and insight is inherent. Now, tomorrow I'm going to talk to you about how you can prove that for yourself out of your own experience, not from somebody else. But for the moment, just bear with me. So the model of mind, you could just, a simplified model here for you. Inherent is this basic goodness and wisdom, compassion, kindness, insight. And somewhere along the line, early days, maybe when we were tiny children, little flicker happens, a little flicker of ignorance. It's very bright, this inherent basic goodness, very bright. Little flicker of fear or ignorance, ignoring, turning away, too bright. Ooh. And so a little layer goes around it, a little layer of ignorance. And the next, there's like an onion, this kind of model. And then there's the sort of idea or concept of separation. Myself separate from other, from the world, from other. You know, people endlessly, in New Age stuff, people are endlessly talking about interconnectedness. Well, it turns out that's true. And it's inherent, but it's covered. It's covered as a result of fear. And then the idea of a separate self, ego, and then, there's a lot of talk about that in psychology, of course, and it's similar here, the sense of self-centeredness, self being different and separate from the rest of the universe. Now, at some point in this layer of the onion, there's discursive thinking, and discursive thinking is, let's say it's subconscious. It's separating self and other. It's what you want to draw towards you and what you want to push away or what you want to ignore. So those are the basic principles of this separation, this ego business. And along with those comes some kind of habitual thinking. And habitual thinking starts at a subconscious level, by the way, it's discovered. And then eventually it gets conscious and it becomes a pattern. So you know, all kinds of people have patterns. Each of us have many patterns of various kinds, patterns of thinking, ways we habitually react to certain circumstances. But these patterns, then the next layer out, the final layer, if you like, of the outer onion, is the patterns become dominant in life. So you say to someone, oh yeah, you say, oh yeah, he's an angry man. What does that mean? That means he's habitually angry. He's easily triggered to become angry because it's a pattern of thinking. You touches something familiar subconsciously, and there's this tornado of thoughts which results in so-called emotions, which then involve the body, and then the guy's an angry man. Or you could say an anxious person. She's very anxious most of the time. Why is that? It's because certain situations, of which there are often many, trigger little thought patterns that become big thought patterns, and then anxiety is the dominant feeling and emotion about it with someone. So now, why is this basic goodness important? It's extremely important. Well, first of all, the whole idea of self-help goes up in flames. There's nothing to be added. You're already a brilliant, perfect person. The question is, how do you access that? Now, I'm going to talk about, tomorrow I'll talk about accessing basic goodness in oneself, and also the implications. Because, here's the interesting thing. If you think someone is a bad person or a good person, I got good in inverted commas there, all those patterns, even an evil person, those patterns are learned. And if they are learned, they can be unlearned. Isn't that interesting? Imagine that. An evil person has at their heart basic goodness. Now, if you want to change them or help them realize that, their error of their ways, or if you're an activist, or if you're a business person who wants to connect with someone, wouldn't it be interesting if you could access the basic goodness in that person in order to communicate with them? It could change everything. So you see, even in this short little blurb here, I've giving you, you can, I think, see the importance of this, of understanding this. And I said this was spirituality. But the thing is, that spirituality doesn't separate you from the rest of life. It's extremely important how you work with people, and in particular, how you can be authentic. Authentic spirituality is what I'm talking about. And authentic spirituality is based on basic goodness. This idea is what a word I was going to use. Not an idea at all, it's a fact. And I hope I'll convince you, not to convince you of the truth of that fact, but to convince you of your own ability to access it in yourself, and therefore you'll know the truth of what I'm speaking. So anyway, that's my thought for today. Tomorrow, and we'll explore this a little bit further.